Okay, so first of all, a good novin to everybody. Thank you, Libby Wolf, for your persistence and getting us together every single month. It's really something special. And Chanaetke Pfefferman, I cannot wait to hear your poetry. It's the highlight of my month, I have to tell you.
Oh boy.
So as you mentioned, Misha Nifnas Adar Marbe Mesimcha. So, Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, one of the greatest diplomats, was asked once, what's your skill set? How do you know how to negotiate so unbelievably? But before I tell you his answer, a side note, my father was in the White House. It was a meeting with the president, among many visits, and he was the chief American correspondent for Yediot Achronot, the largest Israeli daily. And Kissinger spotted him, and he says to him, Mr. Jacobson, you have to stop criticizing me in the Allgemeine Journal, because my father, Louis, reads the newspaper, and he comes to me and he complains to me why I'm not better at Eretz Yisrael and other things. So stop criticizing me. So Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State, and people asked him, well, how did you develop such a skill set? He says, I'll tell you, I wanted to create diplomatic relations between Serbia and the United States. So I traveled to Serbia and I met with the president. I don't know if they call him a president. And I said to him, boy, do I have a match for your son? Boy, do I have a match for your son? She's brilliant, she's beautiful, she's rich. She's everything you could imagine. A girl from the United States. And he says, what? You think my son is going to marry a spoiled, rich, entitled American? You've got to be kidding. He says, oh, no, but it's Rockefeller's daughter. He said, oh, Rockefeller's daughter. Okay, I like the idea. Let's set it up. Then he goes on a plane and he travels to Switzerland and he meets with the head of the largest Swiss bank. And he says, I would like to advise you to hire this man as your president of your bank. He said, who is it? He said, the Serbian peasant's son. He said, you want me to appoint a Serbian peasant as the head of one of the wealthiest banks in the world? What are you, crazy? He said, no, he's not just any boy, he's Rockefeller's son-in-law. Oh, Rockefeller's son-in-law? Yes, good idea, we'll appoint him president. Now he travels back to the United States and he calls up Rockefeller. He says, Rockefeller, do I have a match for your daughter? The Serbian president's son. He's everything you could want for your daughter. He says, what? A Serbian peasant is going to marry into my blue blood family? We're aristocrats. We're sophisticated. My daughter's going to be with a peasant? He says, he's no peasant. He's the president of the largest bank in Switzerland. Oh, the largest. Oh, excellent idea. He calls his daughter. He said, honey, I want to introduce you to a fantastic guy. He's the president of the largest bank in Switzerland. She says, Dad, you think I'm going to marry a banker? They're narcissistic, they're arrogant, they're money hungry, they're selfish, they're dishonest. He says, no, darling. He's a Serbian peasant. He has integrity. He comes from humble beginnings. He has humility. She said, Dad, perfect. Yes, I'll meet him. So this is how Kissinger would make diplomatic relations. And if you read the story of the Megillah, no one other than Esther Malka is one of the greatest diplomats, as we'll soon see in the story of the Megillah. So when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, the Mittler Rebbe took over the Nesius, and it was in Tuf Kuf Ayin Dalid, the first Purim, he went to Shul, the Mittler Rebbe, to hear the Megillah. Now, when the Alter Rebbe was Rebbe, he would read the Megillah. He was the Baal Koide. The Mittler Rebbe was not the Baal Koide. They had a regular Baal Koide, and it was a custom when the Baal Koide would finish a little box, and everyone would give him a tip for reading the Megillah. So he reads the Megillah, and the Mittler Rebbe puts in an extravagant tip into the box. So some of the elder Chassidim said, Rebbe, I mean, at good gelangt, he langed nicely, but such a big tip? So the Mittler Rebbe says, what's wrong? It's given a Shayna Maisa. He told a good story. But they said, how could you compare it to your father, the Alter Rebbe, when he learned Megillah? So he says, Taka, when the Tate had gelernt, es ist given Gott an andere Maisa, he says. When my father read Megillah, it was a whole different story. A whole different story. So tonight I want to share a few, not a whole different story, that's pushing it, but I want to share some insights from the Megillah that really resonate with me, and I hope that it will resonate with you as well. So the very end of the Megillah, when everything is quiet, Esther comes to the Sanhedrin, and she makes two requests. The first request, and you could look it up in Masechta Megillah, page 7, a very beautiful interaction. She says to the Sanhedrin, Kavuni l'dairos, create a holiday, a yontif, for all generations to celebrate. And the second thing she asked is Kosveni l'dairos, take the Megillah and canonize it as part of what we call the Torah Shebiksav, the written tradition, the written Torah. And the Sanhedrin respond, absolutely not, on both requests. If we publicize the story of Purim, it's going to fuel the jealousy and the hatred and the anti-Semitism of the Goyim, of the nations. Why would we want to publicize? Hush, hush. So Esther says to them, I see you don't realize what's going on. The story of the Purim, the story of the Megillah was already written down by the Persian historians. It's already in the Persian chronicles. It's part and parcel of the history of the Persian history books. You can't hush this up anymore. At least we'll write it down. Then the Yidden, for every generation, the Jews will read the true story of what really happened. And the reason they did not want to make the Megillah as part of Torah Shebiksav, they said, we already have 3 times Zecher HaMolech, Parshas B'Shalach, Parshas Kiteitzei by Parshas Zachar we read, and Shmuel Aleph. What do we need another depiction of Amalek? But then they thought it over, and Queen Esther had gepeilt. They established the holiday of Purim, and of course, they adapted the Megillas Esther as part of the Torah Shebiksav. It sealed off the Torah Shebiksav, which is also very fascinating because Megillas Esther, first of all, is the only one of the Ksuvim that takes place Chutz La'aretz. It's not in Eretz Yisrael, which is unusual. And also not one time does it mention God's name in a revealed form. In a concealed form, we'll soon see it mentions the Eibishter's names many a time. But in a revealed form, you don't see the name of the Eibishter in the Megillah. And yet it's part of Torah Shebiksav. That was a little introduction. So it was Purim, and the Rebbe gave over a sicha. And he asked the question. And he said, I was grappling with the answer for so many days until Purim came, the answer came to me, the Rebbe writes in the sicha. I mean, we read it in the sicha, the Rebbe said. The Rebbe asks, when do we fast? Yud Gimel Adar. It's called Tainus Esther, and we fast. So the Rebbe says, first of all, why do we fast Yud Gimel Adar? And secondly, why is it called Tainus Esther, the fast of Esther? If you look at the chronological order of the Megillah, what happened? Achashverosh and Haman made a decree for Yud Gimel Nisan, right? And 11 months later, Yud Gimel Adar was the day that the Persians were allowed to go and attack the Jews. So for 11 months, the Jews were living with trepidation and fear. Anxiety was horrible. But as soon as they set the decree, Mordechai met with Esther, and they established a 3-day fast. So when did the Jews fast in those days? Yudalid, Nisan, right? Erev Pesach, Tezvav, Nisan, first day of Pesach, Tezayin Nisan, the second day of Pesach. And that's why it says, Vaya'avar Mordechai, Mordechai transgressed, because you're not allowed to fast on a yontif. But it was Pekuach Nefesh. And if there's no Jews, there's no yontif, there's no Pesach, so he had to fast. So why do we fast now on Pesach? So you'll say, well, we don't fast on yontif. So why don't we do a nidche, like we do Tisha B'Av that comes out on Shabbos, you fast on Sunday. We should fast after Pesach. But there's a whole different reason that Rebbe says that we fast. What's the reason? The Rebbe said there was a custom among the Jewish nation that when Yidden went to war, went to battle, they would establish a fast. Who fasted? Not the soldiers. The Jewish soldiers couldn't fast because they had to fight, they had to eat and drink. So the people who didn't go to war fasted. The women, the elderly, the older children, and the soldiers made a hachlata resolution that when they return from the battle, from the war, they'll fast on a certain given day. That's how it was. So what happens? Yud Gimel Adar is coming. The Jews are under attack, right? The Persians can go and kill out any Jew. So the Jews established had to have a fast day, right? Because they're going to war. But where's the battlefront? Where's the front line? Who's staying behind? No one is staying behind. Every man, woman, and child was going to war. Everyone had to take weapons, lock themselves up, and hope and pray that no one will come to attack because they would have to defend themselves. So no one was allowed to fast on Yud Gimel Adar because they were all on the battlefield. Everyone was on the front lines. Who was allowed to fast? Who was the only one who fasted, the Rebbe says? Esther. Because she was safe and sound in the palace. No one would dare go into the palace and try to hurt her. So Esther was the only one who fasted on Yud Gimel Adar, and that's why it's called Tainus Esther. And that's why we fast on that day. Remember how Esther, the only Jew, the only person who was able to fast on Yud Gimel Adar, and it is her fast that saved Klal Yisrael. Well, one of the reasons. Imagine 127 nations of Jews, one person fasted on behalf of the whole Klal Yisrael, Esther. So it's called Tainus Esther. So we don't fast because they fasted then on Pesach. We fast because this is when Esther fasted, because the Jews were going to war. Just gives you a picture already of who Esther was, who she really was. So now I chose a pasuk in the Megillah that I feel is one of the most pivotal and the most heartbreaking and emotional pasuk in the Megillah. And I want to share an insight from this pasuk. So we know what happens, right? This is the decree. Mordechai has a conversation with Esther in that one pasuk. What does he say to her in that pasuk? He says, Mi idea. Who knows if this is not the reason that you were put in the palace at this place at this time? That's what he tells her, Mi idea. Maybe this is the reason you were put in the palace, so that you could go and advocate for your people, right? And then he says another thing in the pasuk. He says the Jews will be saved, he tells her. But the question is, will they be saved through you? Will you carpe diem, so to speak? Will you seize the moment and take the opportunity that you have to go and fight on their behalf? That's the question he asks her. They'll be saved, I guarantee you. But are you going to be the one through whom they are saved? So now what's with Mi idea? Couldn't he be a little bit more convincing? What's the ambiguity here? Ani idea, I know, Esther, that this is the reason you're here at this place and this time, because you were put here to save Klal Yisrael. Mi idea, mi idea. Who knows? Maybe this is the reason, maybe it's not the reason. But that's pshat, maybe. But what is Mordechai really saying? That's not what he's saying to her. That's not the conversation at all. He's saying something totally different to her. Mi idea. Mi idea, he says to her. How can we comprehend this? How can we understand this, he tells her? How can you wrap your brain around what's happening here, he tells her. We think he's talking tough, but he's not. He's saying, how we can't understand it. Doesn't make sense. Think about it. Esther was an orphan girl. She came to live with her first cousin. And most of the Mefarshim agree they got married, happily married. And then she's forcibly taken to the palace. She's forced to marry a shikar, a Rosh, a Marusha, a goy, a king. Now, Sarah was abducted by King Paro. She lived by him one day. Esther was there a decade. You know what that means, a decade? With a guy like Achashverosh? And what happens when she comes into the palace? It's such a place of tumah that the Shekhinah leaves her. And she cries out the words of David HaMelech, Kayli, Kayli, lama zaftani. Why did you leave me, Eibishter? You put me here. You think I chose to be the queen? You think I wanted to be in this place? And now you leave me? You leave me alone? How could you do that to me? She calls out to the Eibishter. And that's what it says in Parsha Shemais, where the Eibishter says to Moshe, V'anoichi ahaster aster es panai b'yoyim hahu. That day, there will be a day that I'm going to conceal my face. This is the day. Esther goes in the palace, and the Eibishter puts on his mask. This is the first time we hear about the mask of the Eibishter, the concealment. Megillas Esther, the scroll of concealment. The Eibishter conceals himself. To imagine what she's going through. The pain, the aggravation, feeling that she's left. So this brings me to, is the Eibishter mentioned in the Megillah? Absolutely. Every time it says Melech, it's which Melech? The Eibishter. Nadada Shnas HaMelech. The Melech couldn't sleep. You think it's Achashverosh. No, the Eibishter couldn't sleep. And the Eibishter wakes up, and that's when the tide begins to turn. Remember that Mordechai gets put up in the clothing, and then it says, Yavai HaMelech v'Haman Hayayim. Esther says, let Haman and the king and Haman come. The first letter of each word, Yud Kei Vav Kei. She's inviting the Eibishter, you gotta come. You gotta come forward here. And then Achashverosh is an acronym for Achris Reish Shalai. God is everywhere. So we see very much that Eibishter is mentioned in the Megillah, but again, in a concealed way, because the whole Megillah is one of concealment. And now, the most painful words she tells Mordechai. And we even have to say it in a tone of Eichav, lamentations of mourning. Avadati, avadati, she says. Why double? Because emphasis, but more, because what is she saying to Mordechai? The outcome is never going to be good. If I go to the king's chambers and the entrance of his chambers, avadati, I could be beheaded at that very moment. Or I'll be all oisgiputs, dressed up because I'm coming to the king. And he's knowing that I'm not coming for a cup of tea and to discuss political news. He's thinking I'm there to be with him. What else am I coming for, all dressed up? Before she was coerced, she was forced, she was passive in the relationship. Now she's going willingly to the king. So she says, Mordechai, avadati, I will never, ever, ever be able to come home and build a family with you. It's over, that's it. Once I go to the king, I cannot come back to you. And avadati, she says, once I transgress, I will never, never have a share in the world to come. I am giving up my olam haba. But in spite of that, she goes to the king. We know that she goes. So going back, mi idea, I never understood, they say, Purim, you're supposed to drink ad lo yoda till you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. What does it mean? It means that the whole way we look at Purim is we don't know. We don't understand. Well, how does this happen to a person? How does this happen to a person? They come to a place, the Abish is concealed, There's darkness. Why am I here? Why is this happening to me? A family goes on vacation, 13 children, the baby falls into the water, the mother jumps in, and 2 of them pass away. Mi idea. Is this something that you could comprehend? That could analyze, give reasoning? Mi idea. Mi idea. Who's going to tuck the kids in at night and give a kush on the kepala, when they skin the knee? Mi idea. How could the Eibishter do this? Where is the Eibishter? We ask ourselves. So many tragedies happening. And this is what I think Mordechai and Esther were telling us. There's going to be points in life. Throughout the generations, it's going to be a question, mi idea. You cannot wrap your brain around it. So you have to know that the Eibishter might seem concealed, but you are there for a reason at this time and this place. So the Alter Rebbe was by Einikel's wedding, and there was a batchen. There's a gesture. But in the olden days, everyone had a batchen. But the batchen is a Chabad Chassid. He sees Alter Rebbe. He's not making grammar here. He has to be take it seriously. He's a smart guy, so he says like this: Rebbe. I was thinking we're not so different, you and I. He says to the Alter Rebbe. Was ich weiß, the Rebbe weiß. What I know, the Rebbe surely knows. And was ich weiß nicht, the Rebbe weiß. But the Rebbe weiß nicht, weiß ich nicht, he says. But the Rebbe doesn't know, I also don't know. So Rebbe, he says, we're pretty alike. But then he says, Rebbe, there are a few things you know that I don't know. And then he says the clincher. He says, but Rebbe, tell me, what is the value, what is the estimation, what is the chashivus of everything that you know compared to that which you do not know? He says, how could you compare Rebbe, everything you know to that which you do not know? And there, Rebbe, we're equal. And when the Alter Rebbe heard this, he began to cry. The Rebbe began to cry because, what does the Alter Rebbe always write in Tanya? That you cannot comprehend the Eibishter. That our comprehension of the Eibishter, and the words of the Tanya, ki tipui min hamayim, like a drop of water in a vast ocean. That's our comprehension of Ein Sof. We maybe could comprehend one drop of what the Eibishter is. That's called Tachlis Hayediyah, enlightened ignorance. Your ultimate knowledge is knowing what you don't know. Mi yodeya. You know that you cannot know. And if you take the word mi, yodeya, mi, flip it around, yam, water, our comprehension is like one drop of water. So now let's go back to the very beginning. Esther makes an appeal to the Chachamim, create a yontif for all generations. Let's adapt the Megillah for all generations. Why? Does she need validation? Is she worried she's not going to be remembered? She's not going to be recognized for her heroism? Why is she so insistent that there be a yontif and that we write it down for all generations? So there might be many reasons, but to me, I'll share what I think. First of all, that for all generations, we have to realize that one woman, one person, can save an entire nation. She was one woman. She saved entire Klal Yisrael. One person. She had no allies. Remember when she invites Haman to the feast, and word gets out, everyone called her a traitor. They said, look at that. A Yiddish maidel invited the arch enemy to the feast. They were not forgiving of her. So one woman can save an entire world, an entire nation. One person, that's all it takes. And the second thing, and I'd like to take poetic license if you don't mind. Mordechai says to Esther, the very pivotal words, there will be a geula. But the question is through whom? Will you be the one through whom the redemption will come? Are you going to be the one? And the Rebbe said to us, I did all that I could. Now it's up to you. Are you going to be the ones, or is it going to be somebody else? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Is the Geula going to come through me? Am I going to seize every opportunity, or is this going to be somebody else? And how does the Megillah end? In a very happy way. LaYehudim Haisa Ayra B'Simcha B'Sasan Mikar. And so it should be for us with Gilui Mashiach now. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Freida. I'm going to
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
Very last minute.
With
and when
all
she's traveling.
the Rebbitzins' kind permission, can I now say my poem?
Absolutely.
Okay.